This is a genocide being perpetrated by the U.S. It is not just Israel. It is Israel and the U.S. These are the 70% of the bombs being dropped by Israel are American made, are Lockheed Martin, are Raytheon, are General Dynamics, and much of those is funded by the U.S. Budget. The U.S. sends quote unquote aid. So this brings me to the main story I want to get here, which is how this is a pivotal point in history. We are witnessing very likely what Patrick Lawrence called in sheer post the hinge of history. Now, I don't really love that term because when I think hinge, I think stone. Okay, I think Stonehenge. I don't think history hinge. And a history hinge sounds like it's a circle of rocks that changed history, which that bugs me. And then of course I picture the Spinal Tap, the movie where they have the 2-foot Stonehenge. And I think it's a real problem. And Patrick Lawrence needs to get on his shit. But no, in all seriousness, of course, they're referring to hinge like on a door hinge. That is a 90-degree turn and changes the trajectory. So I want to read some of this article and comment as I go. But it is an excellent article. It's over at Sheer Post by Patrick Lawrence. And it details why this moment right now, there's no going back. And it is perhaps a major change, a major right angle in history. Bombing hospitals was just a few days ago an undeclared red line the Israeli Defense Forces dared not cross without provoking international disgust and condemnation. As of the writing of this article, the IDF is bombing hospitals, and I read its soldiers are shooting patients, invalids among them, as they attempt to evacuate buildings soon to be demolished. There is disgust and condemnation now, and they find expression not only on the streets of many cities, but also in governing circles. Axios reported Monday that an internal State Department memo, I covered this as well this week, signed by 100 officials at state and its aid agency, USAID, accuses President Biden of lying about Israel's military campaign in Gaza and of complicity in war crimes. And the reason that's such a shock is because the people that work inside the U.S. government rarely stand up and say anything against U.S. government policy because they have chosen to work as part of this empire and to continue U.S. hegemony. And yet this is even going beyond the line that they have, which before now we thought was kind of non-existent, but here it is. This is clearly, as Chancellor Scholz of Germany said, an epic changing moment, a time of major change in a new direction in history. 500 years of global dominance by the Euro-American culture, the Atlantic culture, has come to an end. And he's about to explain why this is not just another atrocity committed by the Euro-American culture, why it is an atrocity that is very well may mark the beginning of the end for that culture and for settler colonialism. He says, what we are seeing at the moment in Palestine is the end of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is a phenomenon of the last 2 centuries or so, and it is always accompanied by genocide. Most of you understand what settler colonialism is. It is deciding you as a people are better than another people, and therefore you go and you plant your flag and you say, all the rest of you need to get the frack out of here or else we will kill you. And generally there is mass killing. We saw it with the Native Americans. We saw it with just about everywhere the British Empire went. There was followed by genocide. We saw it with where the U.S. has gone in many cases has been followed by genocide, ethnic cleansing. And even if there's not genocide or ethnic cleansing, it is usually some level of mass killing that then gets the local people, the indigenous people, the native people, the people that were there before to move away or give up and say, okay, you are the rulers of this area. We have no choice because you have bigger guns. So that is kind of the definition, my definition, if you will, of settler colonialism. To continue from the article, the U.S. has gone too far this time. That is how Ajamu Baraka, who I've interviewed many times, a very, very profound and great man. He ran for vice president of the Green Party a while back, and he runs the Black Alliance for Peace. That's how he put it the other day. The U.S. has gone too far. Every commentator making this argument is pithily to the point. The U.S. has gone too far countless times since assuming its imperial pretensions, of course. And, you know, many of you know the U.S. I couldn't even sit here and try and list all the times the U.S. has, quote unquote, gone too far. He says from the Spanish-American War onward. But we are watching genocidal savagery on television once again, as we watched hamlets burn and rice paddies run red during the Vietnam War. Although the difference is back then, there was very little coverage of the actual visuals of the genocide that the U.S. was committing against Vietnam. There was very little, you know, eventually it started to trickle out. Then you had coverage in kind of indie magazines like Ramparts magazine, which, you know, that, you know, who the editor of Ramparts magazine was for a while, Robert Scheer, this is his website, Scheer Post. So you see a connection there. But by the way, Ramparts, and this shows how the ripples of change you can create with just a few little bits of information getting out there, because the article in Ramparts magazine that was written that showed the true atrocities of the Vietnam War, that article was then read by someone with the name of Martin Luther King Jr. Not sure if you heard of him. I think he's going to be something, that whippersnapper, one day. But he read that article and it forced him, not that he was probably always kind of against the Vietnam War, but he wasn't really talking about it as much. He was focused on other things. And seeing that article forced him to start speaking up about the horrors of the Vietnam War. Anyway, to continue from this article, if the U.S. never fully recovered from its merciless violence in Indochina, the damage will be permanent this time. The obscenity it sponsors at the hands of a crazed apartheid regime is simply too full frontal. Real-time inhumanity will prove America's undoing, to say nothing of apartheid Israel's undoing. These are very likely the final days, and of course, final days could mean years and years, but the final days of the Israeli apartheid regime. America's so-called moral authority has been fiction for decades. I would say since the 1945 victories, but it is now in something close to free fall collapse. I'd say America let go of the moral authority the moment we dropped atomic bombs on Japan. That was the end of the moral authority. So the U.S. had moral authority for about 8 seconds. To continue from the article, Israel is now breaking U.S. laws circumscribing the use of American-made armaments. It is in breach of multiple UN Security Council resolutions, and nobody in the U.S. says anything about it. I'm sure he means nobody in the ruling elite / the mainstream media. It is the rest of the world that is beginning to speak up. I put it this way. We watch as the age of hegemonic hypocrisy, as I propose to call it, draws to a close. And, you know, this goes along very much with what I've been covering for months and months, saying that the proxy war in Ukraine is the beginning of the end of U.S. hegemonic rule. We are seeing a great splitting of the world's economy, with Russia and China, the two biggest on one side, and the U.S. and, you know, Canada, UK, etc. on the other. And that is the beginning of the end for America. The idea that the United States owns the world and will coup or have economic war or full-on war against any country that goes against it. And by going against it, we mean as small as not wanting to do business in dollars. The U.S. And the other thing that the proxy war proved was that much of the world, in fact, 80% of the world's population, has not sided with the United States in the proxy war against Russia, in the proxy war in Ukraine. 80% of the billions of people on this planet live in countries that have not signed on to the U.S., you know, sanctions against or war against Russia. Now, that doesn't mean all of them have thrown their lot in with Russia in the proxy war, but it means they have not given in to U.S. pressure, which shows the waning power of America. But I do think what we're witnessing right now, the horrors of this genocide in Gaza, is very well, 10, 20 years from now, we may point to this moment and say that was it. That was the end of the American century. Now, obviously, the American century has spanned, half in the 1900s and half in the 2000s. But the article says, and it's unqualified support for Israel's daily spree of murder, starvation, and dehydration in Gaza is of a piece with this. PIECE, for those of you listening to the podcast. We now have the Chinese preparing, by all appearances, to play a diplomatic role in the search for a settlement. We have Iran and Saudi Arabia summiting to determine a common course of action in response to the Gaza crisis. We have Turkey militantly denouncing Israel and talking to Iran after long, long years of animosity between Turkey and Iran. We have a goodly number of America's friends pulling the plug on their relations with Tel Aviv. Finally, he concludes, when I watch the gruesome video footage from Gaza, I think of the people I see as actors in history. They suffer, in effect, for the sins of those who purport to lead us. Their suffering is turning history's wheel. We will owe them much for this as the order they too stand for comes into being. And, I think he put it a bit lightly there to say we will owe them much. We owe them, more than anyone can give them, because many of them have lost their lives and in this pursuit, in this shift, in this global change that we're seeing take place